Well, everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the OnePlus 11 and compare it against the iPhone 14 Pro Max and see which specific phone is a better one for you. Now, before we even get down this rabbit hole, I will leave both these phones linked down in the description below. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with both these devices, I will say they are very unique, and that is kind of what I like about both these phones. With the iPhone 14 Pro Max, this phone came out a little bit later last year, and it was a pretty good phone. It was a decent upgrade coming from the 13 Pro Max, at least on the display front. We have a 6.7-inch Super Retina Extra OLED display. Now, this is a very good panel. It gets very, very bright, much brighter, I would say, compared to the OnePlus 11, and it's definitely one of the best things going for this specific device. Now, it's a 120Hz panel as well, very high resolution for an iPhone, and I think it's a really good front, looking device. The only issue I kind of have here is, for one, the hole punch display. It's a little bit, it's that dynamic island. I'm not really a fan of it. I feel like they should just go for a specific hole punch display much smaller. And I don't even think it's that big of an upgrade coming from the notch, to be honest. But it is what it is. I guess it's kind of growing on me a little bit. But on the front of the OnePlus 11, we are getting a little bit of kind of same type of thing, 6.7-inch fluid AMOLED display. This is, doesn't get as bright as the iPhone 14 Pro Max's panel, but it is high resolution, and it's still a 120Hz panel here. Now, a few things I like about this panel. For one, it is a actual hole punch display in the top left corner, which I think visually looks better than what we're getting on the 14 Pro Max. But on top of that, the glass is curved on the sides, which I actually do like a lot. Having a curved glass is really cool, and I actually do prefer that over the standard flat glass panel, but a lot of people are the exact opposite of me. So keep that in mind. Just because I like it doesn't mean you'll like it. On the bottom, USB-C on the OnePlus 11, Lightning on the 14 Pro Max, and on the back, very unique setup on the OnePlus 11. So on the OnePlus 11, we have that camera setup, which is very unique. It looks kind of like the same thing as the OnePlus 10, but it's very different than what most camera manufacturers are doing right now on their phones. So it looks very, very cool, but you have this sandstone texture on the back, which they kind of brought it back from the OnePlus 1 and I think the OnePlus 2 as well, but I am not a fan of this type of texture. I feel like the frosted glass back that we had on the OnePlus 9 and the OnePlus 8 was perfect. They should have just kept that, to be honest. I don't know why they kind of shifted focus here, but I guess it is what it is. There's not much we can do about it at this point. On the back of the 14 Pro Max though, we do have the triple camera setup up there with that frosted glass back. Now, like I said, I prefer that frosted glass back way more, but there's not much we can do about it. I understand, there's not much we can do right as of this point, but I would probably say the exterior body might go for something like the OnePlus 11 just because it looks so unique, but the iPhone 14 Pro Max definitely feels much more like a premium phone, to be honest. Now, moving on to the camera side of things, like I mentioned, both of them have triple camera setups on the back, and this is the thing, okay? With the iPhone 14 Pro Max, we have a 48 megapixel wide-angle lens, 12 megapixel telephoto lens, then a 12 megapixel ultra-wide camera. With the OnePlus 11, we have a 50 megapixel wide-angle lens, 32 megapixel telephoto lens, then a 48 megapixel ultra-wide camera. Now, on the back, we can do 4K at 60 on both of these, but on the front, we can only do 4K at 60 on the front of the 14 Pro Max. The OnePlus 11 can only do 1080p, but the OnePlus 11 can do 8K on the back of its camera. So very weird stuff here. I don't know which one to give, points to from the resolution standpoint. I'd probably say the 14 Pro Max kind of wins there. And I do think the 14 Pro Max wins in the overall camera department as well. So with the 14 Pro Max, we have a lot of features built in, but not as many as compared to the OnePlus 11. But the camera is very, I think, acceptable is the word. You know what to expect, or expectable. You know what to expect with that camera. It's very reliable. It may not be the best, but it's definitely not the worst. And you know what you're getting with that type of camera. It's still very solid. With the OnePlus 11, the UI I don't think looks that great. It's very stuttery and it's very glitchy. The whole phone is kind of glitchy, to be honest. But the camera itself isn't even that great. And I do hate having 1080p on the front. I wish it was higher than that. Even though I usually film in 1080p, having the ability of going up to 4K is really important. And you cannot do that on the front camera of the OnePlus 11. I feel like both these phones are, good cameras. I don't think either one of these phones are the best cameras this year, to be honest. But I would probably say the 14 Pro Max is probably the better camera when it comes down to it. So in terms of that kind of covers it up there. Now, in the software and the longevity of both these phones, this is kind of the other issue that we're kind of getting on the, OnePlus 11. Although, the OnePlus 11 is still going to last a long time, it's not going to last as long as the iPhone, in this case, the 14 Pro Max. But the other issue I have with the, OnePlus 11 is that the software that this phone has came out with is very glitchy. It's It's a very glitchy experience, and it is a huge step away from what the software used to be like on the OnePlus 9 and OnePlus 8. Oxygen OS used to be a super cool, super lightweight, system. Nowadays, it is kind of weird, and I actually prefer One UI over Oxygen OS now, which I never thought I would hear myself saying. But with iOS, although it's pretty boring and there's not much going on with it, at least in terms of updates, at least it's still very reliable. It's still glitchy for sure, in and of itself. But I would say with the iPhone 14 Pro Max, you're going to be getting a longer lasting phone on that type of device than the OnePlus 11 in this specific case. So in terms of that kind of covers it up there. Now on the performance side, this is also another very interesting thing. With the iPhone 14 Pro Max, you were getting that Apple A16 Bionic chip inside of it with 6GB of RAM. With the OnePlus 11, you were getting the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 chipset inside with 8GB of RAM on the base model, but it goes up to 16GB of RAM. Just think about that. You were getting way more RAM, like almost twice the amount of the mid-tier model than what you're getting on the only iPhone 14 Pro Max. There's a couple different models, but all of them have 6GB of RAM. And this is what I'll tell you about, these specific devices. I think the iPhone 14 Pro Max is still a very fast phone. You don't really need the most amount of RAM in order for it to be like a stable device. And I think anything you're going to do on that device is going to be perfectly fine. I've still been using my iPhone 13 Pro, and it's been a very fast, fluid phone. The 120Hz definitely makes it feel that much smoother and faster, which is awesome. With the iPhone, with the OnePlus 11, I think this is a very fast phone as well. But I did just compare it against my iPhone 12, and my iPhone 12 was kind of outperforming my OnePlus 11, which was pretty crazy in terms of app opening and getting into certain applications. So I think this phone still needs a lot more updates. I think they just dropped this phone. I'm not too sure what's going on with it, but I definitely do think it'll get better throughout time. But in a perfect world, that 8 Gen 2 chipset is a very fast chipset. It should be, and you have a ton of RAM on that type of device too. I just think OnePlus kind of needs to go and update their devices a little bit more, and I think from there, this phone will probably get a little bit better. But I do think the overall better performing and more optimized phone is probably the iPhone 14 Pro Max in this example. And although you can still install third-party apps and emulators and stuff on the OnePlus 11, I definitely do love that side. But from just comparing apples to apples in terms of performance, the 14 Pro Max probably wins here. And the 14 Pro Max definitely wins in the battery life department as well. Even though I wouldn't even say this battery life is the craziest best battery life of all time, for some reason the OnePlus 11 with its 5000 mAh battery wasn't even outperforming. It was getting beat by my iPhone 14 the other day too, and my iPhone 14 Pro. And the Pro Max has better battery life than those two phones. So to kind of sum up this whole entire video, what I'll definitely tell you is the OnePlus 11 I think still needs some work. I think if they can just get the software more optimized, they can fix the battery life and the performance issues. I think the OnePlus 11 could be a really solid phone. But personally for me, I'm not a fan of the back. I'm not a fan of the cameras. But I think the rest of this phone is still fairly solid, and it is an overall cheaper phone than the iPhone 14 Pro Max. I think the 14 Pro Max though is, kind of overpriced for what you're getting. I think it was a pretty small update coming from the 13 Pro Max, but I would consider this the better phone overall. Maybe even from a dollar per value standpoint. I mean, this phone's going to last longer. I think it's more optimized of a device. The cameras are better on this phone, and the battery life is going to be better on this device too. So in terms of that, that's kind of how both these phones kind of compare. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.